Yes, and welcome to Discussions of Truth. I am your host, Ian Hamilton Trottier. I come to you weekly, Wednesdays, 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, to deliver inspiring, thought-provoking discussions. And as I mentioned, they are of seeking out truth. Hence, the title of that song, Metallica, Seek and Destroy. Destroy corruption on all levels. Corporate, financial, whatever they may be, and most importantly, in government and politics. Hence, the guest that we bring on to this program today. It has been over a year trying to secure a date. 6-term former U.S. Congresswoman from the state of Georgia, who happens to be the first black woman to represent that state in the House on Capitol Hill. Cynthia McKinney will be joining Winwood Radio today and Discussions of Truth with Ian Trottier. In about 3 minutes' time, we'll be hosting a 10-minute quick segment with Fatima Bakhoum. She's the founder of Open Letter. That's OPENLETR. Note the spelling. Open Letter. She's a Chinese-born Malian citizen who grew up in Libya, Saudi Arabia, and Mali. Objective of Open Letter: a female-only social app with the mission of eradicating marginalization of 1 billion women by 2035. That's what I like about what Fatima is doing. She has a goal. She has an agenda. Do you know that the United Nations happens to also have an agenda? And that agenda is controlling the way you understand life as it is to you in various forms and various ways. But nonetheless, Open Letter has its own agenda. By 2035 is the mark. Quote, she says, "We are leveraging technology to proactively close the gaps in women's rights. Open Letter provides easy access for women to receive and provide help in the areas of sexual abuse, work discrimination, harassment, relationships, and self-esteem issues, as well as enable to connect with one another over educational, entertaining, and uplifting content." Next week, Daniel Estulin will join the program. And he'll speak about, he's written many books, but he'll speak about La Trastienda de Trump, which in English is Trump behind the scenes. Okay, Daniel Estulin will, and as I've mentioned before, he's caught the eye of the late Fidel Castro and some of the work he's done. Following that, we'll have Gretchen Peters, a former ABC News correspondent, and I would consider, certainly from my standpoint, a expert in opium trade, opium wars, as I will, in Afghanistan. And just in today, we've secured August 22nd to host the author of Esoteric Hollywood. Why is this important? Because pedophilia is running rampant in Hollywood. Esoteric Hollywood. Jay Dyer will be joining the program to discuss what he's researched and what he understands about various symbolisms in Hollywood. Sexual abuse of teenage boys runs rampant. We know in Hollywood, but also segues into not just boys, into politics. It's a very disgusting fact and reality of life that we live in. Yeah, it's 2018. It's the world changes rapidly, and certainly the nation changes rapidly. We'll end August by hosting former Lieutenant Colonel Robert Buzz Patterson, United States Air Force, retired. He's a former military combat pilot, distinguished White House military aide under Bill Clinton. He's a best-selling New York Times best-selling author, leadership consultant, public speaker, and former commercial airline pilot. What's very interesting about Colonel Patterson Buzz is that he was the operational commander for all military units assigned to the White House, which included Air Force One, Marine One, Camp David, and the White House Transportation Agency. He's the author of the best-selling book. He's got two of them. The one we'll be discussing is Dereliction of Duty. How Bill Clinton fumbled what was called the nuclear football. Whoa, something that got squashed by dereliction of duty is a specific offense. You can click on my website. I got listed under United States Title 10, Section 892, Article 92. That means that if the former president, for instance, were to be tried under that, he very well could be found guilty. We'll see what Buzz has to say, and of course, Kevin Shipp. We've secured his interest in joining the program. He will be joining the program. It's just a matter of rescheduling him. So, slate of some really good stuff coming down the pipeline. Let me cut to a break, and we'll bring on Fatima Bakhoum for a few minutes to hear what Open Letter's all about, and before segueing to Cynthia McKinney. Cynthia McKinney. Thanks for joining Wynwood Radio. I am your host, Ian Trottier. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Instagram, IANTROTTIER. Donate to the program. If you like, I urge you to. IanTrottier.com. IanTrottier.com. And by the way, my book, it's my second book. So I wrote a book in my college years. My book has just been released. It's for purchase online on my website. The title of the book, Freedom Reserved. No More Lies.
The couch is an island, a desert oasis. The room is a spaceship, and you're an undiscovered planet. I push the hair out of my eyes, I pull the blanket around me, I bite my nails, scratch my shoulder. Peel the label off the bottle and tear it into tiny pieces. I don't know what to do with my hands. I don't know what to do with my hands. Maybe the phone will ring, and then I'll get to answer it. A momentary distraction. I can't predict your reaction to my touch. I could sit here all night, our knees almost touching, but not.
Sucking down is clear, leaning on your deconstruction. Taste me, you will see, more is all you need. Dedicated to how I'm killing you.
Okay, and I'm back, and I always like to come back in with Metallica, go out with Metallica. We have via Skype with us Fatima Bakhoum. She is the founder of Open Letter. Fatima, are you there?
How are you?
Very good, very, very good. Thanks for taking your time out to join Wynwood Radio and Discussions of Truth. Fatima, for listeners to... and I've given a little bit of an intro about what you've done. You come from a family of diplomats, and maybe you want to give a few moments about that, and give a little bit of background, and then tell us about Open Letter and women's rights.
Absolutely. So West Africa and China, and grew up in Libya as well as Saudi Arabia in the Middle East. And so I grew up seeing women marginalized. They had to cover up. They could not go out just like women here would do. And so I, from a very young age, interested in the digital better. empowering to women, really highlight women that are doing great things to set and to really motivate other women to. So while I was doing that, I came across many different articles of Me Too and Times Up, very ashamed. Went through a sexual abuse, and I lived in silence for 8 years.
Wow.
So I did not feel comfortable with the fact that I was empowering women when I myself was not fully empowered. So I decided that I was going to speak out. So I created a video and we published it on the web. And from that point, and it's hard to believe, but I received a lot of pressure to remove it because it was shameful. They would tell me you would never get married, no one would want to be with someone who was sexually abused, etc., etc. But then, on the other hand, other women reached out to me, and that was the most amazing feeling that I've actually felt throughout this process, because the shared that shared experience removed everything, all the history, that even the fact that we didn't know each other, we communicated as if we knew each other. And that was the beauty of it, because we were able to connect based on the fact that we were women and we went through something that was that we knew was really traumatic. And so from that point, I realized that to solve it's more project of creating an app, so a social app that women's needs and psychology in mind, acknowledging the societal issues that we face. So in other words, dual purpose, provide an anonymous space for women to share and receive support freely. They can come forward without any additional pressure and shaming, but also to enable women to connect with one another and an empowering tribe. So really, a community of support.
Wow, that's excellent. And is this app that you're speaking of, is that something different than your website Open Letter?
Yes, so we're extending into the app. So think about the one way, right? So you readers read, they can comment, but really there is no other interaction. There is no thing. You can't. It's almost speaking to a wall in a sense. You can see, you can go deeper, and so the social truly build a community of women, of supportive women, so we can share, we can learn, we can get entertained, we can entertain each other. I'm not sure if you probably write the TV show Friends. Imagine Open Letter is Friends, the TV show, and we are all women and we're no problems with one another. So that's really what I would love. I want us to change the perception that women tend to think that we're all when that has been built by society. In fact, we're taught to compete with one another for the attention of men, when really we should serve for one another, support one another, and be there for one another.
That's amazing. Now, where did this really incept? Did this come from experiences in any particular country? Is there really any experience in any particular country that this came from? Your desire to do this?
The desire from being, but also there are statistics. So 90% of adult rapes are female. So all the rapes, the victims are 90% female. It's only less than 40% of the victims to seek help. And so I'm not sure if you realize, but every 98 seconds, actually 2 or 3 women are being sexually, and less than 40% will ever ask for help. And it's a chilling statistic and driving for open letter. It's the force that we have changed the narrative, and women must seek help. They must speak to one another about any issues they have with sexual abuse, trauma, and any related societal concerns.
Now, Fatima, share with listeners some of the accolades or victories that you've seen with the development of this program.
So before actually touching that, I really wanted to stress something else.
Sure.
So in the process of building the app, starting Open Letter, as you can imagine, any organization really requires funding, right? And so what I came across now more than ever is that when you talk about anything relating to social impact or impact investing, investors tend to really perceive it as not so lucrative, which is not true, of course, but it's a perception. And so I really want to tell the audience that if you do have a goal in mission, if you have a passion and you really want to do good, and you hear people telling you, well, that's not going to generate, I don't know, 200,000 million within X years, we are not so interested. Please go for it, because it's only by really being crazy and believing in yourself that you can really change the world. And there are many ways to raise funds. So in our case, we launched a GoFundMe campaign a few weeks ago. The goal is to raise 50,000, and this is not to build the app. The app is actually done. It's really to take it into the market. And so there are ways. And I'm asking also the audience, if anyone cares about women's rights, about helping change the narrative, please go on gofundme.com/help reverse women's narrative and make a donation. And if you cannot, that's completely fine. Simply share the link with your friends and family members.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Fatima, for sharing that. And are there any last words that you'd like to leave with listeners?
I would say again, my whole belief. I have a guiding principle. I just want to tell the audience that you have to make choices where your heart and mind are aligned. So please don't stay in your 9 to 5 happy. If you have something else in mind and you know that it will make you happy, you can change the world, you can have an impact, go for it. It's real in your truth.
Thank you, Fatima. Ladies and gentlemen, Fatima Bakhoum of OpenLetter.com. That's LTR.com. We look forward to inviting you back on the program, Fatima, and thanks for joining Wynwood Radio.
Thank you, Ian. Bye. Have a great day.
Ladies and gentlemen, Fatima Bakhoum, very sweet of her to join the program this afternoon. She's phoning in from New York. Let me take a moment and address the Me Too campaign. Tarana Burke, I believe she's up in Georgia as well. Atlanta joined the program a number of months ago, close to a year now. This isn't something that should be dealt with in a light manner. If you know somebody that is being abused, I urge you to please turn to a group like that of which Fatima has created. All of us, on one level or another, have succumbed to being afraid, really, right, of sharing certain experiences don't be, because it's, as commonly discovered, it's more common than we think. And there's certainly a line that is drawn. So empowering women, women's rights, that's it's wonderful. It's amazing. And an example of that would be certainly running for the highest office of the land, which our next guest has experience doing with the Green Party in 2008. I'll be right back. Cut to a break, where we'll be joined when I return by former U.S. presidential candidate in 2008, Cynthia McKinney. Thanks for tuning in. This is Winwood Radio. I am your host, Ian Hamilton. Trottier.
I don't know what to do with my hands. I don't know what to do with my hands. I don't know what to do with my hands. I don't know what to do with my hands. I can't decide on a channel. I'm just flipping around, maybe you can choose. Maybe some kind of monster. Maybe I just don't know how to reach out. Reach out. I don't know what to do with my hands. I don't know what to do with my hands. I don't know what to do with my hands. I don't know what to do with my hands. I kinda wanted to stay this way, no more rules, no mistakes. Nothing lost, nothing broken, like a boat on the windless ocean.
Okay, welcome back. This is Winwood Radio, broadcasting from the Winwood District of Miami, Florida. It's been well over a year since this program has been in discussion with the guest that I'm about to introduce. She's a six-term member of the United States House of Representatives from the state of Georgia, and she's the author of multiple books. Her current book, How the U.S. Creates, I'm going to substitute the word here, crap hole countries, and it alludes to comments by the current person that sits in the Oval Office, Donald Trump. We welcome to the program Cynthia McKinney. Cynthia, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you very well. I hope you can hear me as well.
Crystal clear, Cynthia, crystal clear. Let's jump in quickly to something that, now this is interesting, Cynthia, because last week the program hosted Richard Gage. And Richard, I think you're familiar with him. He's a member of the American Institute of Architects. He's put together AE 9/11 Truth, 501c3, and he mentioned your name. I don't think he had any idea that you were joining the program, but he had mentioned your name in our discussion last week. We'll get into that, but one of the things that he mentioned was that he was excited, or he alluded to this concept that you had introduced me to via an email of Powercells. Can you describe this to listeners? What is this concept of Powercells?
Well, oh my gosh, I should actually pull up the document. So now just let your audience know that I'm just going from the top of my head, which basically the Powercells concept comes from my years of experience in sort of the political arena, and also and not just from my time in Congress, but of course probably that serves as the icing on the cake to formulate I guess a set of behaviors that the people of the United States need to engage in if we quote unquote want to take our country back. So it begins, the idea, the concept begins with the idea, with the notion, and I borrow quite heavily from our current president, who gave us the language that we didn't have before. So, for example, when I was trying to say in my own way that the system is rigged. I never said the system is rigged. The system is rigged. 4 words, right? And that's exactly the situation that I think many people who engage the system find, that it's really difficult. They're surprised when they get a positive result, because the majority of the results that we get is either being ignored or our values not counting, except on election day, of course, when our votes are counted, if our votes happen to be counted.
Yeah, right.
That's right. And so, so I started with just my overall knowledge of the U.S. political system, and also the fact that the system has been rigged not just for the last 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, but our system was rigged from the first day that the Pilgrims set foot on the North American continent. So there's been some rigging of us as individuals ever since the beginning of the founding of this country. So as individuals, we've been rigged, not just the system as a whole, but all the way down to the individual that operates within the system. And so then I looked at my PhD is in leadership and change. So I've got lots of theory on leadership. I've got lots of theory on change. I've got lots of experience in both. And so I thought what I would do is we look at our political system as a whole, and one that has been rigged terribly, such that corruption is rife in our system. Then what is it that we seek more, first and foremost, more than anything else? We seek a system of governance that has ethics embedded in its processes. And we are so far away from ethical governance that we've got to engage in certain activities. Now, these theories and applications are based on the behavioral sciences, usually in the corporate world, which engages in leading change and managing change. The corporate world has to roll with the punches, or else they don't roll at all. And so they've engineered this concept called total quality management, so that you're always in this in the process of adapting to change so that you can survive. And that is exactly what we have not been taught to do. So the goal of the Powercells is to organize the people of the United States from different walks of life. The way I put it, we sit down at the same table in the same room, although we are individually vastly different, and we come up with common solutions to the problems that plague our communities. And so this is a community-based way to empower ourselves. First of all, we have to unrig ourselves as individuals. Then we take that group of individuals that is in the process of unrigging themselves. We turn them into a team. They started as a group, but they become a team, and then they become problem solvers. And so the way I envision it is that we would spend one day together, and we would go through this process with techniques that have been honed and proven, evidence-based techniques that have been proven to work. And we do that for ourselves and our country so that we can, in the end, defeat the deep state's tactic of divide and rule. We know that they divide us. And it's not just one side that's practicing the division. It's both sides that are engaging in divisiveness. For example, I can look at Fox News, I can read Washington Times, and I can see that they're painting us into this left-right Democrat versus Republican scenario. And the same thing happens on the other side at CNBC, MSNBC, CNN, and CBS, and the rest of them. So this is and let me just also add that these divisions are reinforced by the entertainment industry. So Hollywood is definitely a tool that is used by the deep state to reinforce the rigging that it inflicts on all of us. This is a way for us, those of us who say we want to take our country back. This is a practical way for us to do that as community and in respect of the differences that individuals bring to the table.
Beautifully said. There's a lot of points here. Let's stick with, for listeners to identify this concept, which is very much a reality if you can understand how to see it that way. Because like you're saying, the average American is given a certain picture to view the reality in a way that those that control them would want them to view it. So let's go with this rigged. We are definitely all rigged. We one of the differences here in the United States is that we don't have a king or a queen, and that was kind of one of the founding differences, if you will, in my opinion, and is alluded to the success on many levels. But of course, there are many threats. So even without that kind of monarchical rule, the average citizen is still rigged. Can you explain in your own words, for listeners to understand what that means, being rigged?
Well, in one way, for example, we in the United States, we've been racially rigged.
Oh my goodness!
And I recently participated in a panel at Party National Convention that was held in New Orleans at the beginning of this month. And no, last month, because it was in July. Yeah. And it was a very interesting experience for me because now, mind you, I grew up as a Democrat.
Right.
I was elected as a Democrat. All of my political activity up until 2007, when I declared my independence from the Democratic Party, and all of the national leadership that was responsible for the U.S. engaging in the interminable wars. So this walking into, with all of my preconceived ideas about what libertarians are, that was like, for me, walking onto the moon.
Wow.
You know? And so it was totally, and that wasn't the first time I did it. I did it again. I did it the month before in June when I went to the Red Pill Expo.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yes, which is an organization founded by G. Edward Griffin, who is the author of the Creature from Jekyll Island. And so there I am walking again in this lunar landscape where I know absolutely nobody in the room. And so now, how many times do we do that? How many times, even with the structure of our lives, we are in familiar settings and we kind of stay there.
Yeah.
And that's how the U.S. population is politically balkanized. And so, for example, you can look at radio, actually, and radio is one of those ways, and, radio formats is one of those tools of the deep state that utilizes an already balkanized population and further puts them in silos. So now, how do we structure, and this was the question at the Libertarian Party National Convention, how can we structure our relationships so that we are no longer in silos? You know, Cy Hirsch wrote about the siloed intelligence that allowed the George W. Bush administration to lie to the public 935 times and take us to war because on fake intelligence, because that intelligence was fabricated, and then the fabricated intelligence was siloed directly into the vice president's office, and then the vice president had something with which to base a war action on, even though it was fake. Now, that reminds us exactly of what we're going through right now with the whole Russiagate thing. And so, you know, if it worked one time, why not let it work again? And this is the deep state pulling the same play. You know, like I grew up looking at football. Actually, I was a cheerleader back in the day. Right. And so, you know, when the quarterback is calling his own number and doing a quarterback sneak, the offense lines up in a certain way. When the quarterback is going to do a Hail Mary pass, the offense lines up in a certain way. And so what I've been able to learn or discern is the plays that the deep state is about to run or is in the process of running, because they have these templates. The more successful ones are the ones that they use over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So really, what you're speaking of in regards to the individuals being rigged, it's definitely a brainwashing on various levels, and you thread in Hollywood and entertainment in there as well. But now let's get into your understanding as a major political person on a federal level. What is the deep state? I mean, it's becoming more of a common, almost a household term in 2018. And what is the deep state?
Well, that's a very good question. First of all, it's important to remember that, you know, even when we say the government is comprised of individuals, and they have names and faces. And so the deep state also is a phenomenon that is comprised of individuals, and they too have names and faces. So now, how can I answer this? First of all, I have to say with some degree of pride that the professor who coined the term is named Peter Dale Scott. And Peter Dale Scott made certain observations after the assassination of JFK. And through, you know, say several iterations, maybe a generation or a generation and a half later, then I become involved with these individuals who had dedicated their lives and in some cases suffered a lot because of that dedication to the truth and obtaining evidence for what actually happened on November 22nd, 1963. And so Peter Dale Scott said that the deep state is manifested by deep events, and the deep state practices deep politics. So before he actually came up with the concept of deep state, he first theorized about deep politics and deep events. Now, Peter Dale Scott served on my dissertation committee. And so basically, I was told, well, now, you know, you need to go and find Peter Dale Scott and hone his methodology because, well, we need more sort of deep researchers. Okay,
Right.
and so now what is the methodology? In his words, the methodology is researching what's not there. Now, what in the heck does that mean?
Well said. Okay.
That's right. Exactly. So now I didn't know it at the time because this was prior to me actually, well, I knew about him, but I had when I was in the Congress, I really had no idea that he would actually end up serving on my dissertation committee. Well, anyway, what I would tell my congressional staff is that we have to they have to learn how to see the invisible, hear the unspoken, and read the unwritten. And in order to do that, that requires deep research. Okay, so now that to know what's there, and you have to know it from almost every vantage point so that you can know, for example, when you read the Christian Science Monitor or the New York Times or the Atlanta newspapers or whatever the locals listen to it on CBS News, you have to be able to discern what's not there. Mm-hmm. And so the deep state consists of these individuals who are there and at the same time not there. Mm-hmm. So we have a public state, and the public state is our president. But the deep state that controls our public state are those names and faces that we don't know. And so what you have, an example of this, a great example of this, is the European Union. Because the reason you're having such an rejection of the EU is because transparency has been obliterated in the EU. That's why we had Syriza elected in Greece with the Grexit. We've got, Cameron didn't expect the Brexit vote, but Nigel Farage certainly organized for it. We've got Italy with 5 stars, I believe is the name of his party. And we've got Podemos in Spain. And so you've got an expression coming from the Europeans that they're sick and tired of people in Brussels that have no names and no faces, yet have complete control over policy for all of these different countries. And so you could say that the EU is the quintessential example of a deep state that's operating wide open in the daylight, but no one knows the names, sort of the policymakers. And that's exactly the situation. Who is it that controls the United States? And when we say they don't want us to do this and they don't want us to do that and they're just trying to stop us, the question that I asked in my first dissertation, so I've been in so many different PhD programs and written so many beginnings of dissertations, but the original dissertation that I was working on, I never finished it, at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, was like, who is the they? And the they, in quotation marks, that's the deep state.
Okay, so Cynthia, let's now go here. What is your opinion on the Federal Reserve?
Well, of course, I'm just like a whole lot of other people in the United States, not fully aware of what the heck the Federal Reserve, well, at one time, not aware at all of what the Federal Reserve is. And so never gave it a second thought, just, got my dollar bill, my Federal Reserve note, and was trying to spend as much of it as I could and doing like what most Americans do, don't save enough.
Yeah.
Well, what happened was when the deep state manifested itself to me and I became its target, that's when other people who were well versed in the deep state and its machinations and its operatives began to reach out to me. And one of those persons, I have to say, I received out of nowhere, I received an autographed book from Anthony Sutton.
Oh my goodness.
I know.
Wow.
So
wow.
So I couldn't put the book down. And so then I began to understand really the history of my own country that I didn't know. And after that,
from an Englishman. Sorry.
Huh?
So I said from an Englishman. He was born in the UK, right?
Okay. And then I got some, people began to send me stuff, and eventually I got 2, G. Edward Griffin and the Page Turner. Oh, you can't put it down.
Wow.
And of course, there was a little more than passing interest because I'm from Georgia, and I know Jekyll Island.
Oh, right.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so then that's when I said, okay, I can get this. And it was an illegal. I mean, it has the aura of legality, but
right.
Really, it really isn't, because when you do something and there's hardly anybody in the room and you're operating off of unanimous consent and it's like, Christmas holidays and it's almost treason.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So now we've got, and it seems apparent that you, didn't support Hillary Clinton, and from my mind, I'm like, wait a second, what we're going to get is another member of the Clinton power machine. We already had, and it's not like we haven't had this in the history of the U.S. before, but we had father and son Bush. But let's now go into, is there anything in your view? Is there anything behind these kind of all-boy networks like the one that Sutton, who I'm certainly somewhat familiar with, spoke about at Yale University? We're talking about John Kerry and that society there that is often referred to as the Skull and Bones. Is there? I mean, if from an outsider standpoint, you're kind of okay. The Federal Reserve, it's like this kind of dark veil, like you're saying. It's this. Is that the deep state, or is that the mechanism that's kind of running the turning the lights on in the U.S. Capitol? We think that we're working our butt off as Americans, paying our taxes, like you're saying, and trying to save our money. But is there this kind of rigged system that we're all kind of feeding into? And if we're such a transparent, constitutional republic, with these democratic values, then, why is it that there's these questions in the voting system and whether, vote's been rigged or a birth certificate is valid or that sort of thing? I mean, not to go too far off of line, but, we've got like 9/11 and it's, I mean, for years and years and years and years, I'm just kind of like, hey, it's Osama bin Laden and it's this war on terror. It's this religious, fanatic war that we have to worry about and fight as Americans, and it's liberty, religious liberty, and freedom, and all the cornerstones that make the Constitution great. But then in 2008, you're kind of like, well, wait a second, there's so many question marks about 9/11, and for me, Cynthia, and for me, it was this spray that got sprayed here in Miami that is banned by the European Union. It's called nail. It's a known neurotoxin. Yet the CDC out of Atlanta and the local government said no, you got to be sprayed with it. It's it is what it is, and we got to combat the Zika virus. And from looking into that, Cynthia, that just blew my mind because I actually ended up connecting dots to different authors like Anthony Sutton, and that's why I've had Charlotte Iserbyt on the program, because her father was a member of Skull and Bones. But you're a high powered U.S. federal official, and you're taking this you're pushing the envelope. You're saying, well, wait a second, no, we're not as transparent as Americans may believe, and no, we need to stand up as Americans when we've got to kind of push the envelope and start questioning authority. Is there anything in what I've just said there, Cynthia, that you'd like to comment on or that resonates with you? I mean, maybe you want to segue into your current book, how the U.S. creates, crap hole countries. It's up to you. But is there anything you'd like to comment on at this moment?
No, well, you're just singing song. You're singing my heart song, because this is what I've been trying to say ever since it became apparent to me. And I've only, recently started talking about this particular moment when I realized it was all fake. The Democratic Party, the Republican Party, I mean, they're all controlled by the same people. And so once you are able to shed that partisan tribalism and look at the U.S. political system as a whole, man, you can see the flaws screaming at you. And so then what we've got to figure out a way to do is to use the language that Donald Trump wonderfully gave us. The system is rigged, drain the swamp, fake news, and then use those realities to our advantage, to the advantage of the people.
Yeah, well said. I want to mention a quote, and this is an MLK quote, and we have been he said 1967, we have been repeatedly failed with the cruel irony of watching Negro and white boys on TV screens. This is in the 1960s, so not quite the same era that we're living in. And as they kill, they kill and together for a nation. They're being killed together. They're dying together for a nation that has been unable to seat them together. So they're in Vietnam. They're being killed together. They're dying. They're losing their lives together. Yes. Yet they can't even sit in a classroom. This nation at that time wasn't even able to sit them in a classroom together to learn, right? And so that's an MLK vote or quote that comes from kind of that deep South struggle, of course, that you can certainly identify with in Georgia.
That's right. And so then, of course, it becomes incumbent upon us to look at all of these wars, which is what Peter Dale Scott began to do. And of course, he wrote the book entitled The American Deep State, I think is the name of his book. He's written several books and he's got another one coming out. And but it was that moment when the president of the United States had his brains blown out in broad open daylight. What is this? What kind of country is this? And then there's a prefabricated response that everyone buys into and everyone propagates because that's what is wanted for us to believe actually happened. And this generation of the JFK assassination researchers, now what Peter Dale Scott did was he took it further and he said, let's look at the policy change that occurred as a result of the murder of of Kennedy. And so you have Kennedy saying things like he's trying to wind down U.S. military aggression around the world, particularly in Vietnam. And when Johnson comes in, he's not in office 24 hours and the policy changes. So there was a consequence to that action that they would have us believe a lone man did. And that consequence was basically the victory of the military-industrial complex that wanted to have no part in nobody talked about détente at that time, but the détente with the Soviet Union that JFK was talking about. In his graduation address to American University, literally weeks before he was murdered the way he was, he said the word peace in that speech that lasted roughly 30 minutes. He said the word peace more than 30 times.
Wow. Wow. Incredible.
So now we have a similar event in broad open daylight. We have 4 times in one day, the $1 trillion military and intelligence infrastructure fails. And we're supposed to believe that it failed because, well, we're not supposed to ask why it failed. We're supposed to just parrot that we were hit because we were free. Those were the talking points that were passed out on September 11th. We were hit because we were free. And every member of Congress went back to their district and lied with those talking points. Except me, of course, because I was not convinced by any stretch of the imagination, first of all, that we're free people. And so then once you began to look at what the activities were of our president and our vice president, they appealed to Tom Daschle, who was the majority leader in the Senate at the time, to not have an investigation. Okay. Now, when this is the op-ed that I wrote in the Washington Post that started Juliet Eilperin, which makes me wonder really who she really is, because I'm aware of COINTELPRO and the fact that the FBI and CIA have their journalists, they have their media outlets, they have their publishing houses, they have their direct connection to Hollywood. And so who are these people really that we're told to, are such successful journalists and that we're supposed to be looking up to? Who are they really? Who do they belong to really? Well, anyway, in the op-ed that I wrote, I said, well, what happened to the Transportation Safety Board? Because the National Transportation Safety Board it was created for the purpose of rising above partisan politics and getting to the heart of transportation tragedy, which, of course, September 11th was. And the National Transportation Safety Board has subpoena power. They have investigation power, investigatory powers. They can even, if say, for example, there's a wiring problem, they can even mandate that every airline change the wiring in that particular series of airplanes. I mean, they have immense power so that when you say it's never going to happen again, that you can rely on the National Transportation Safety Board having done its investigation, having taken its corrective measures, and that it truly will not happen again. Not that problem, maybe another problem, but not that problem. Well, that didn't happen with the events of September 11th. Why?
Interesting. It sounds like there might be a cover-up.
Well, of course, there's a cover up. And this is, there's as much a cover up on the events of September 11th. And the sad thing about it is that our young men and women are being maimed and killed, put in harm's way, coming back with either addled brains or maimed bodies because they are being sent into these far off places to fight these wars that are not in the U.S. interest. And every president has justified these wars that we are in because of September 11th. And yet, the people who are engaged in the fighting of these wars on the British side, the European side, and the U.S. and Australian sides don't have a clue about what happened on September 11th, because the Europeans didn't get any investigation either. Tony Blair promised a white paper that never happened. Colin Powell promised a white paper that never happened. And all we get is my staff called it the fairy tale that was written by, I can't think of his name now, Zelnick or whatever. And that's what we have for what happened. And yet Bush doesn't get subpoenaed. Well, he doesn't even, let alone subpoena, because of course you've got the situation the commission that was created didn't ask questions of Bush alone. They just didn't follow normal investigatory procedures. And so we don't really have any assurance of what happened. Yet our young men and women are strung all over the planet, and U.S. taxpayers are paying for it. And at the same time, our drinking water is failing. Right. Our transportation systems are inadequate. Our education and healthcare systems are not producing the outcomes that the people of the United States need in order to remain competitive in the years ahead. We're a failing society, but all of our treasure is going to killing people. And it was Dwight David Eisenhower who said every dime spent on war is a loss to our treasure, as a squandering of our treasure.
Amen. Well said. Beautiful quote. I haven't heard that. Cynthia, who does the deep state benefit, in your opinion? Who is this? Who is this benefiting? In 9/11, who does that benefit? If it's not the Al Qaeda or this fanatical Islamic group, who is this benefiting?
Well, of course, you have to go by. You have to really. I don't know. It's so obvious to me. I just don't know why it took people 20 years to figure this out. But when you look at who benefits, it's not my next door neighbor, it's not my mom, and it's not me as a U.S. citizen, but somebody else is benefiting. And so the deep state is not monolithic. And what I have looked at is the theory coming from Peter Turchin, in addition to Peter Dale Scott gives you some telltale signs of whether some event that takes place is a deep event. And then, of course, you've got this theory put forward by Peter Turchin that says after a period of economic boom, what happens is that the deep state fractures. So at one point, the deep state of the U.S. was monolithic. And then the deep state fractured. And so now I see that deep state having fractured 3 times. And so I see 3 different factions, and they seem to be fighting each other to the death. But now, you there's so much,
Sure.
and I don't have much time. But so, for example, what you would look at are some of the indicators of who basically controls the economy. What I say is that these 3 deep state factions are fighting over 2 things. One is to have their finger on the nuclear button, and that means total control over all aspects of the U.S. state and what that means. And of course, with the assets that the U.S. has all over the planet, that's huge. Right. Then you have the second goal of these factions, and that is the right to loot the state with impunity. And we actually have seen that, the beginnings of that, such that all we have to do really is look at Russia in the 1990s under Gorbachev, and in the Soviet Union under Gorbachev, and Russia under Boris Yeltsin. Boris Yeltsin, of course, handpicked by members of the U.S. deep state in order to lead Russia. For what purpose? For the looting of Russia. And that's exactly what happened. And so now you've got these divisions in Russia because you've got the people who benefited from the looting, and then you've got those who were looted. Medvedev is a part of those who sides with those people who did the looting, and Putin is the one who is siding with those who were looted, basically. So you've got the same scenario where all of the assets of the Russian state basically devolved into the hands of 11 what are called oligarchs. And so that means Gazprom, Rosatom, all of the huge state-owned enterprises came into the possession of individuals. Now, the same exact thing is they're fighting over the ability to do that to the U.S., to the people of the U.S. So on the one hand, you might have had a unified deep state at one point that tangentially cared about some people in the U.S., certainly not Black people in the U.S., because, you wouldn't have had the trajectory of tragedies that have befallen us, and you wouldn't have had the whole Jim Crow and, the things that happened to us in the South, that you just wouldn't have had that. But so there was some kind of consensus about how some people would be treated and some people would be spared. Under this new crew, that has risen to ascendancy now for the U.S. deep state, it's clear they don't care about the people of the U.S. It's a whole new ball game. And so that's how you can get the rusting out of mid-America that, quite frankly, was never, sort of negatively touched in that way before. And so people began, you can see behaviors among those populations that began to take place that are similar to the behaviors that took place within the African American community. Mm-hmm. And so you've got, maybe crack cocaine, which was the result of the CIA's activities, because before the CIA got involved in fighting the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, there was no such thing as crack cocaine. And the DEA was a part of that whole scenario of making sure that every Black family in the United States was affected by crack cocaine. Today, it's the opioid crisis, right? and it's affecting different people. But the objective is the same. And so now those communities that might have been spared in the past, what they realize is that the same pernicious policies that were implemented or effected against the African American community have now been effected against them. And that's why I believe it's so important that we figure out a way to overcome our siloing, to overcome our balkanization, to overcome the real as well as the manufactured political divides, and sit down at the same table in the same room and figure this thing out for the survival of us all.
Well said, Cynthia. Thank you for your words. For listeners to understand your vision and perhaps it's the concept of power cells, how, in closing, how do Americans unrig themselves? How do Americans make change, in your opinion?
Well, there's now you're going to tax me because I I know this stuff, and yet I've forgotten his name. Oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed. But anyway, there's a practitioner who also has theorized one of the techniques that I would like to utilize in the Powercells. But I have to apply for funding. I have to write the proposal. I'll be doing the month of August, writing the proposal, seeing if I can get it funded so that I'll be able to take this concept into every one of our 50 states. But you have, it's called Immunity to Change. And so basically these Harvard University researchers discovered that on the individual level, we say we want to change. We say we want, to move to the next level, but we also are quite comfortable where we are. And so we have to overcome that comfort level and understand why there's this fear to move to the next level into that uncharted territory. Like I said, to land on the moon and then navigate yourself through a room full of people that you've never seen before and are the polar opposite of you, right?
Wow.
We've got to figure, that's a skill, and we have to figure out how to do that. Well, the immunity to change process carries us through what our fears are. And then once we recognize those fears and act on those fears, we're actually able to move to that next level. So there's tons of these strategies that have been honed by the academicians, the scholars who have then gone out and practiced them. They've done the research, in like psychology and everything, and then they've applied them, and they've now learned that these things work. So I would like to take those techniques and then help people to unrig themselves. In that process, when we make sure that we're in a room full of people who are vastly different than us, because that's the part that I would have to construct, that make sure that the power cell consists, when we have our meeting, consists of people that, it's like a lunar landing. And at the end of the day, you know what we're going to end up doing? We're not going to care about what language you use. We're not going to care about what words you use. We're going to care about heart-to-heart communication. And at the end of the day, we're all going to organically, it's not going to be anything that's forced, because we're going to use appreciative inquiry to find out what we share, the things that we share. Yeah. And then I guarantee you that people will end up hugging each other and crying. There will be such transformations that will take place, positive transformations, just from this one process. But it's not just that transformation, because it's also an action plan. So we will identify the problems that we have in each community. So we go in there, I would go in there with my team, and we don't have any preconceived ideas of what the problem is or what the solution is, because that's the role of the people themselves to work through these processes that we know work to get to what can we do to resolve this particular problem in 24 hours? What can we do to resolve this particular problem in 1 week? And we go through, so my vision is that we would have about 5 problems identified that could be solved by a series of actions. This power cell becomes a local action committee, engaging with the members of city council and engaging with the members of their congressional representatives. And my vision, my hope one day is that they will run for office.
Beautiful, beautiful. And that's exactly where change needs to happen, is right in our communities, right in the roots. Cynthia, thank you for joining the program. It's been wonderful. It's been a pleasure and an honor to speak with you. Do you have any closing comments, any closing thoughts to share with listeners?
Well, people can find me. I'm pretty active and opinionated on the social media. So you can find me on Facebook at Cynthia McKinney Official. Remember that, official. On Twitter, you can find me at Cynthia McKinney, just my name. I'm on the blockchain platforms as well, Minds, which gives Ethereum, the cryptocurrency, and Steam It, which gives Steam, the cryptocurrency. I'm there as well. And also I'm on Gab. And then people can reach me directly through my website, allthingscynthiamckinney.com.
Wonderful. Cynthia, thank you for joining Wynwood Radio. We look forward to inviting you back on the show. Thank you, Cynthia.
Bye-bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, 6-term member of the United States House of Representatives from Georgia, Dr. Cynthia McKinney. You've tuned into Wynwood Radio, or you're re-listening to it on a podcast platform. I'll cut to a break, and I will be right back for some closing comments. I am your host of Discussions of Truth. I air weekly Wednesdays starting at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ian Hamilton Trottier.
I kinda wanted to stay this way, no rules, no mistakes. Nothing lost, nothing broken, like a boat on a windless ocean. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do.
Hello, this is Franca, Mario's mom, and you're listening to Wynwood Radio. Hello.
Seek and Destroy. I love it. I love Metallica. I love this song. That is your right. It's an inalienable right. to voice your opinion, to speak your mind, to stand up for what you believe in. And if anybody says that you can't, as far as I'm concerned, take them to task. Cynthia represents an incredible woman, a black woman, defying multiple odds, as you heard from her, from the community that she represents, something that, unless you're a black American, you truly can't identify with. If you're a woman, you can identify with a little closer. But somebody like me, I cannot identify with the struggles, as she mentioned, that she represents coming from the Deep South. Remember, I'm a Californian, so I'm pretty much raised oblivious to these different Jim Crow laws and really the philosophical nature of what Martin Luther King represented. But I did live a year in South Carolina, so I am familiar with and have been to Jekyll Island. And some of these things, like Cynthia, resonated with me. And when that spray hit Miami, that's when things really resonated. And that's why I do this program for you. Next week, remember, Daniel Estulin, Trump behind the scenes. I mentioned it last week on the program. I'm going to mention it again because if you're looking and if you're listening to me, you probably are, and that's a good thing. Maybe you'll get involved in one of Cynthia's Powercells, which I'm going to look into absolutely, as you'll be introduced to me. Trine Day. I happen to study at a school in Oregon. I spent 4 years of my life in that state. It's a organization that happens to be based in that state, okay? I mentioned it once. I'm not going to mention it again. Daniel has written multiple books, and they appear on that site. On the 15th of August, Gretchen Peters will join us. She's a graduate of Harvard University and the University of Denver MBA from Joseph Corbell School of International Studies. I've mentioned it before. Two Peters' papers I've put links to on my website. The United States Institute of Peace, How Opium Profits the Taliban, and West Point's Combating Terrorism Center, Haqqani Network. Yes, she would brief the Pentagon. Yes, she would brief the military before heading into Afghanistan. And we're going to close out the second half of August by hosting Jay Dyer, who'll speak about esoteric Hollywood, pedophilia, a very disturbing and real element of life in Hollywood. Dyer describes what he's discovered about how certain symbols, cult references, and subliminal sexual abuse messages, disgusting, appear in what you and your child may be reading, watching, and hearing when you turn on one of those multi-million-dollar productions. And then we will close out this month with Buzz Patterson. Colonel Patterson was operational commander for all military units assigned to the White House, which included Air Force One, Marine One, Camp David, and the White House Transportation Agency. Folks, I come into studio every Wednesday, 5 o'clock, to deliver to you an inspirational, thought-provoking discussion of truth, as the show has been basically formed into being titled, because you need to stand up and question your government. You just have to, or suffer the consequences. And one of those consequences, again to repeat it, might be an invasion of your airspace. Yes, as an American. Yes, in your state. Yes, by, depending on how you look at it, but definitely by an agency in your government. That doesn't mean that you oppose your country, all right? No, it doesn't. What it means is that you're being an American and you're exercising, and I'm repeating, some of your inalienable rights that the Constitution represents and reinforces for you to live by. I thank you for listening. I thank you for supporting me. Pass the episode on to a friend. Pass on to a family member. You have listened to Winwood Radio, and I am honored to be your guest, Ian Hamilton Trottier of the weekly program Discussions of Truth. Until next week, be awesome.